When we talk about rich celebrities today, we think of tech investments, beauty empires, and social media side hustles. But long before likes, brands, or influencer deals existed, a small group of Golden Age Hollywood stars were quietly building fortunes so large they still shock financial historians today. Here's the question Hollywood never liked to ask. What if the most powerful stars weren't the loudest, the flashiest, or even the highest paid? During the Golden Age, studios controlled everything: contracts, images, careers, even private lives. Most actors lived well, but not securely. Their fame was immense, yet their financial futures were fragile. And yet, hidden in plain sight, a select few were doing something radically different. While audiences watched performances, these stars were buying land, demanding ownership, negotiating profit participation, acquiring rights, investing in technology, and building empires designed to survive long after applause faded. These weren't accidents. They weren't lucky breaks. They were calculated decisions made inside a system that actively discouraged independence. Some of these stars looked modest on screen while quietly owning thousands of acres. Others smiled through sitcoms while controlling studios, networks, or intellectual property worth hundreds of millions. A few treated Hollywood itself not as a destination but as leverage. So why were these fortunes kept so quiet? Was it humility or strategy? And how did these stars manage to outgrow an industry designed to own them? In this video, we uncover the true financial stories of 13 Golden Age stars who understood a truth most of their peers never did. Fame creates attention, but ownership creates power. These men and women didn't just make movies, they built systems. And while careers rose and fell, their wealth kept growing in the shadows. This isn't a story about luxury, it's a story about control. On screen, Fred MacMurray was the definition of the American everyman. He played kind fathers, dependable husbands, and middle-class men whose biggest problems were family misunderstandings and gentle life lessons. In My Three Sons, he wasn't rich, powerful, or intimidating. He was safe, familiar, ordinary, but what if that image was exactly the point? While audiences saw MacMurray as a modest television dad, he was quietly becoming one of the richest figures in Hollywood history and Disney's first true millionaire actor, not by chasing bigger roles, not by demanding higher salaries, but by doing something almost no one else in Hollywood was willing to do, turning fame into land. At the height of his television success in the 1960s, MacMurray was earning a staggering $150,000 per episode, an almost unthinkable salary at the time. Most stars would have spent that money on mansions, cars, or lifestyles designed to reinforce their celebrity status. MacMurray did the opposite. He took nearly all of his television income and poured it into California agricultural land, specifically walnut ranches. Why walnuts? Why farmland something so unglamorous, so disconnected from Hollywood? And more importantly, why did he choose an investment no studio could control? MacMurray understood something his peers didn't. Television money could disappear overnight, but land didn't answer to studios. Land didn't care about ratings. And land didn't vanish when fame faded. By the time of his death in 1991, MacMurray owned 1,700 acres of prime California farmland, much of it in Sonoma County. His agricultural empire was valued at over $100 million, equivalent to roughly $210 million today. Even more shocking, at the peak of his later life, MacMurray was earning more from walnut harvests than he ever made acting. So why didn't Hollywood know? Because MacMurray never wanted them to. In an era when studios still punished actors who appeared too powerful or too independent, displaying wealth was dangerous. If a studio realized an actor didn't need them anymore, leverage disappeared, roles dried up, careers quietly stalled. MacMurray avoided that fate by maintaining a carefully controlled image: the humble professional, the dependable employee, the man who looked like he belonged to the middle class. But behind that image, he was building something far more permanent. Instead of buying luxury, MacMurray bought timber forests, working farms, and income-producing land. Assets that grew quietly while Hollywood focused on appearances, One financial analyst later summed it up bluntly. Television made McMurray famous, but investments made him rich, and the real shock came after his death. McMurray's farmland holdings have continued to appreciate for decades, potentially multiplying several times over since 1991. Some analysts believe those agricultural assets alone may have quietly pushed his heirs toward billionaire-level wealth, all from decisions made while he was still playing a middle-class dad on television. So here's the uncomfortable question. If Fred McMurray was making more money harvesting walnuts than making movies, who was really working for whom? And if land gave him freedom studios couldn't take away, how many other stars missed that escape route entirely? Most chilling of all, how many actors believed fame would protect them, while McMurray trusted something far more durable. Lucille Ball was America's funniest woman. On screen, she played chaos, impulsive, emotional, always one step behind her own schemes. Lucy Ricardo never seemed in control, and that was the joke. Week after week, audiences laughed at her failures. But behind that carefully crafted image of disorder, Lucille Ball was doing something almost no one in Hollywood expected, especially in 1951. She was taking control. When CBS refused to film I Love Lucy in Hollywood and insisted the show be broadcast live from New York, Ball didn't argue or compromise. Instead, she made a decision that quietly rewrote television history. Together with Desi Arnaz, she formed Desilu Productions and retained ownership of the show. In an era when networks and studios owned everything sets, scripts, reruns, and profits, this move was radical. Ownership was the one thing Hollywood didn't want performers to have, and Ball took it anyway. The consequences of that decision became clear in 1957. When CBS paid $4.3 million, about $44 million today, for the rebroadcast rights to the first 180 episodes of I Love Lucy. Unlike every other sitcom of the era, that money didn't go to the network. It went directly to Ball and Arnaz. In a single moment, Lucille Ball stopped being just a highly paid actress and became a power player who understood that salaries end, but ownership doesn't. After her divorce in 1962, Ball stunned Hollywood again by buying Arnaz's share of Desilu for $2.5 million, becoming the first woman to run a major Hollywood studio. While the public still saw her as Lucy, the woman who could never get anything right, Ball was now approving budgets, greenlighting projects, and deciding what American television would become. And she was willing to risk everything she had built to protect that control. No gamble was greater than Star Trek. Network executives doubted it. Advertisers didn't want it. Desilu itself was financially fragile, yet Ball personally approved the series even after its first pilot failed. If Star Trek collapsed, Desilu could collapse with it. But ownership meant the risk and the decision was hers. That single choice helped launch franchises like Star Trek and Mission Impossible, properties that would generate billions long after Ball stepped away from television. In 1967, she sold Desilu to Gulf Plus Western for $17 million, roughly $144 million today. Not as a salary, not as a bonus, but as the value of ownership. To the public, Lucille Ball remained the funniest woman on television. Behind the scenes, she had quietly proven something far more dangerous, that the most powerful person in Hollywood didn't need to look powerful at all. To most Americans, Bob Hope was comedy. He was the smiling entertainer, the tireless USO performer, the man who seemed permanently attached to a golf club and a microphone. His image was light, patriotic, and harmless, someone who joked for a living and never appeared to take anything too seriously. But behind that carefully maintained persona, Bob Hope was quietly becoming one of the largest private landowners in California. While audiences laughed, Hope was buying land, vast amounts of it. His most staggering acquisition was an 8,650-acre parcel in Palm Springs, purchased in the 1960s when California land was still considered cheap and unglamorous. This wasn't a vanity purchase. It was a long-term position in scarcity. Decades later, that single property was sold by his estate for $130 million, just one piece of a real estate empire that included major holdings in the San Fernando Valley and Malibu. Hope didn't flip houses. He accumulated territory. Why land? because land couldn't be canceled. It didn't depend on ratings, trends, or public favor. And in an industry where careers could vanish overnight, land offered something studios never would: permanence. While other stars spent their money reinforcing celebrity lifestyles, Hope was quietly securing assets that grew whether he was funny or not. The true scale of his wealth only became visible after his death in 2003, when analysts were stunned to discover that Bob Hope's estate was worth somewhere between $400 million and $1 billion, not from jokes, not from television specials, but from decades of disciplined land accumulation, carried out so quietly that most of the public never suspected anything at all. So here's the question. If Bob Hope was one of the most powerful landowners in the country, why did Hollywood never see him as a threat? Was his harmless image an accident or the perfect disguise? And if land ownership created a level of freedom fame never could, how many stars laughed their way through careers while missing the one investment that actually lasted? To the public, Gene Autry was the singing cowboy, wholesome, heroic, and endlessly reassuring. Children knew him from radio, movies, toys, and television. He wasn't dangerous, he wasn't controversial. He was Americana, but while audiences focused on the cowboy hat and the guitar, Autry was quietly building one of the most diversified business empires in entertainment history. Autry understood something few stars grasped at the time. Popularity fades, but infrastructure endures. Instead of relying on records and film roles, he reinvested his fame into radio stations, television networks, hotels, and real estate, creating a vertically integrated media empire that produced income whether he performed or not. His most audacious move came in 1961, when he paid just $350,000, about $3.3 million today, to become the founding owner of the Los Angeles Angels baseball franchise. At the time, the purchase seemed eccentric. Why would a movie cowboy want a baseball team? But Autry wasn't buying entertainment, he was buying permanence. Sports franchises don't depend on trends or box office cycles. They appreciate quietly, relentlessly. Decades later, the Angels would be valued at over $2 billion, turning that single decision into one of the greatest returns on investment in Hollywood history. By the 1980s, Autry's holdings included the Golden West Broadcasting Network, KTLA Television, multiple radio stations, hotels, and vast real estate assets. His acting career made him famous, but ownership made him untouchable. When he died in 1998, his fortune was estimated at over $320 million, roughly $560 million today, enough to fund the Autry Museum of the American West entirely through his estate. So here's the question Hollywood rarely asks. If Gene Autry stopped needing applause decades before he stopped being famous, who was really dependent on whom? Was the singing cowboy an entertainer or a systems builder hiding in plain sight? And if ownership of teams, stations, and land created lasting power, why did so many stars settle for hit records and short-lived fame instead? Jimmy Stewart built his career on humility. On screen, he was the honest man, the quiet hero, the neighbor you trusted without question. Off-screen, he lived the same way: no excess, no flash, no appetite for Hollywood spectacle. That modesty wasn't an act, but it was also a shield. Because behind that unassuming persona, Stewart was quietly assembling one of the most disciplined investment strategies in Hollywood. His turning point came not from a film role, but from a decision that stunned the industry. At the height of his career during World War II, Stewart stepped away from Hollywood entirely to fly combat missions over Germany. While other stars protected their earning years, Stewart suspended his income and unknowingly created the perfect conditions for long-term wealth. With fewer expenses and no lifestyle inflation, his existing investments were left to compound undisturbed. When he returned to acting, Stewart made a move that would change how stars were paid forever. For Winchester 73, the studio couldn't meet his salary demands, so Stewart accepted something unprecedented: a percentage of the film's profits. The gamble paid off. As the movie succeeded, Stewart earned far more than a flat fee ever would have delivered, proving that participation could outpace paychecks. Quietly, the power balance shifted. From there, Stewart doubled down on discipline. While his peers bought larger homes and louder symbols of success, he stayed in the same modest Beverly Hills house for over 4 decades. His money flowed into carefully chosen growth stocks during the post-war boom, allowed to multiply through patience rather than publicity. By the time Hollywood insiders finally noticed, Stewart's portfolio had grown to over $30 million, roughly $53 million today, built not from stardom, but from restraint. So here's the question: if Jimmy Stewart's greatest role was playing the everyman, did Hollywood ever realize how much power he was quietly accumulating? Was his modesty a personality trait or a financial strategy that let his money work while his image stayed harmless? And if compound interest rewarded patience more than applause ever could, how many stars spent fortunes chasing attention while Stewart let time do the work? Elizabeth Taylor was never subtle. To the public, she was glamour incarnate, lavish jewels, epic romances, and headlines that followed her everywhere. She looked like excess. She sounded like indulgence. And for decades, that image distracted almost everyone from what she was really doing. Because behind the diamonds, Elizabeth Taylor was building a business machine that would eventually generate more wealth than all of her films combined. Her transformation began in 1963 with Cleopatra, the most expensive film of its era. Taylor became the first actress to demand and receive a $1 million salary, shattering a barrier Hollywood believed should never fall. But the paycheck wasn't the real victory. The quiet genius came when she negotiated a 10% share of the film's profits. In an industry obsessed with upfront pay, Taylor understood that ownership didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. That lesson reshaped everything she did next. While Hollywood fixated on her marriages and jewelry, Taylor was thinking in terms of brands and control. Her most lucrative move arrived in 1991 with the launch of White Diamonds, a fragrance she didn't merely endorse but helped own. Unlike modern celebrity licensing deals, Taylor negotiated deep participation. The result was staggering. White Diamonds went on to generate over $1.5 billion in revenue, and even decades after her death, it continues to earn tens of millions annually for her estate. This wasn't vanity, it was strategy. Taylor didn't just collect jewels, she treated them as assets. Her personal jewelry collection, assembled with investment intent, sold for $156.8 million at auction, with individual pieces appreciating by more than 3,000%. While the public saw extravagance, Taylor saw leverage. When she died in 2011, estimates placed her estate between $600 million and $1 billion. The most shocking part wasn't the number, it was the source. The majority of that wealth didn't come from acting at all. It came from ownership, participation, and businesses that outlived her screen presence. So here's the question. If Elizabeth Taylor turned celebrity into a self-sustaining empire, why did Hollywood spend decades treating her like a cautionary tale instead of a blueprint? Was her image of excess a flaw or the perfect smokescreen for serious power? And if diamonds were only the surface, how many stars mistook spectacle for substance while Taylor quietly owned the system beneath it? Bing Crosby projected ease. His voice was smooth, relaxed, and reassuring, as if success came naturally and nothing ever rattled him. To the public, he was effortless charm, radio's golden voice, Hollywood's calm center. But behind that laid-back image was a mind sharply focused on one thing most performers never considered: technology as power. Crosby's breakthrough didn't come from another hit song or film role. It came from an investment. After World War II, he quietly backed Ampex, a small company developing magnetic tape recording technology. At the time, radio was still largely live. Recording was clumsy, unreliable, and dismissed by networks. Crosby saw something different. Tape would change broadcasting itself and give performers control over time, schedules, and distribution. By investing early, Crosby didn't just profit financially, he reshaped the entire industry around his needs. That single decision allowed Crosby to pre-record his radio shows, something almost unheard of at the time, while simultaneously turning his stake in Ampex into a fortune as the technology spread across radio, television, and eventually the music industry. While other stars spent their earnings on visible luxury, Crosby bought a piece of the future infrastructure of entertainment. From there, his wealth strategy expanded quietly but relentlessly. Crosby became part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team, invested in oil wells, television production, and emerging media companies, building a portfolio so diversified that his entertainment income became almost incidental. To audiences, he remained the friendly crooner. To insiders, he was something far more dangerous, a performer who understood that owning technology meant shaping the rules everyone else had to follow. By the time of his death, Crosby's fortune was estimated at around $400 million in today's dollars. Not built from applause or box office numbers, but from early ownership of systems that outlived any single performance. So here's the question. If Bing Crosby helped invent the modern idea of recorded entertainment, why is he still remembered only as a singer? Was his relaxed persona a coincidence or the perfect disguise for a man quietly buying the machinery behind Hollywood itself? And if technology ownership created power no studio contract could match, how many stars spent careers chasing hits while Crosby bought the future instead? William Boyd's career looked like it was ending just as television was beginning. The Western film genre was fading, theaters were emptying, and Boyd's most famous role, Hopalong Cassidy, seemed destined to become another forgotten relic of old Hollywood. To studio executives, his films were obsolete. To the industry, his best years were clearly behind him. That was exactly the moment Boyd made the most dangerous decision of his life. He spent his entire life savings, $350,000, to buy the rights to his old Hopalong Cassidy films and the character itself. In Hollywood's eyes, it was financial suicide. Why would anyone gamble everything on outdated black and white westerns? Why buy content the studios themselves no longer wanted? Because Boyd understood something they didn't. When television exploded in popularity in the late 1940s, networks suddenly needed content fast. Boyd owned something priceless. A complete library of family-friendly westerns at the exact moment television was desperate for programming. In 1949, NBC began airing Hopalong Cassidy, and the reaction was immediate. Children were obsessed, parents approved, and Boyd owned every inch of it. What followed was one of the first true merchandising explosions in entertainment history. Hopalong Cassidy appeared on lunchboxes, toys, clothing, comic books, over 2,400 licensed products. By the early 1950s, the franchise was generating hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money, with Boyd, not a studio, controlling the licensing. At his peak, Boyd was earning the equivalent of nearly $10 million a year from merchandising alone. He didn't just play a cowboy. He owned the saddle, the gun, the brand, and the audience. And yet, Boyd never looked powerful. He didn't run a studio. He didn't dominate headlines. He simply let ownership do the work, while Hollywood watched, confused, as a washed-up actor quietly out-earned most active stars. So here's the question. If buying his own past made William Boyd richer than his entire acting career ever could, why did so few actors ever dare to do the same? Was Hollywood blind to the value of old content, or terrified of what ownership would give performers? And if one forgotten cowboy could become a merchandising king, how many stars walked away from fortunes because they never owned the characters they played? Cary Grant looked like the perfect studio star. Elegant, charming, effortlessly polished, the kind of leading man Hollywood was built to showcase. On screen, he embodied sophistication and ease. But behind that tuxedo was one of the sharpest negotiators the industry had ever seen, a man who quietly dismantled the studio system from the inside without ever declaring war on it. In 1936, at the height of studio power, Grant made a move that shocked Hollywood. He walked away from long-term studio contracts and chose to work freelance, negotiating each film individually. At a time when studios controlled careers through exclusivity and fear, this was considered reckless, but Grant understood leverage. By freeing himself from permanent contracts, he immediately quadrupled his earning power, choosing projects on his terms while studios competed for his availability. The real masterstroke came years later with Operation Petticoat in 1959. Instead of accepting a $750,000 salary, already an enormous sum, Grant negotiated 75% of the film's profits. The gamble paid off spectacularly, earning him over $3 million from a single film, equivalent to nearly $30 million today. While others chased bigger paychecks, Grant was quietly rewriting the rules of compensation. But his strategy went deeper than profit shares. Grant accumulated ownership stakes in film negatives, assets that continued generating income long after premieres faded and reviews were forgotten. These weren't glamorous purchases. They were invisible. But they turned his films into long-term revenue streams rather than one-time paydays. Beyond cinema, Grant made early investments in businesses like fragrance companies, expanding his wealth beyond Hollywood entirely. By the time of his death in 1986, Cary Grant's estate exceeded $60 million, roughly $157 million today, a fortune built not on constant output but on control. To the public, he remained the definition of classic movie star elegance. To Hollywood insiders, he was something more unsettling, proof that a performer could outgrow the system without ever being punished for it. So here's the question. If Cary Grant broke free without being blacklisted, why did so few stars ever follow him? Was his charm simply a screen persona, or the perfect camouflage for ruthless financial independence? And if owning the films themselves created wealth long after the applause ended, how many stars spent lifetimes earning salaries while Grant collected forever? On screen, George Burns and Gracie Allen looked like an imbalance that somehow worked. Gracie played the scatterbrained wife, delivering surreal logic that made no sense at all. George stood beside her, dry, exhausted, forever reacting. The joke was clear. Gracie was chaos. George was the adult in the room. Audiences laughed at the illusion. But behind that act was one of the most carefully structured business partnerships early television had ever seen. Instead of remaining network employees, Burns and Allen formed Burns and Allen Incorporated, producing their own radio and television shows and retaining ownership of the content. In an era when most performers were paid per episode and walked away empty-handed, this decision changed everything. Ownership meant control over reruns, syndication, and long-term revenue assets that kept paying long after performances ended. While other stars chased higher salaries, Burns and Allen quietly built a company. That structure proved decisive when the George Burns and Gracie Allen show ran on CBS from 1950 to 1958. Because they owned the show, they profited not only from its original broadcasts, but from every reuse that followed. As television expanded, reruns multiplied, and the checks kept coming. They weren't just entertainers filling airtime, they were content owners supplying a growing industry. Their strategy didn't stop there. Burns and Allen reinvested earnings into California real estate and oil production, anchoring their fame to tangible assets that survived shifts in taste and time. When Gracie retired in 1958 and later passed away in 1964, the business structure they had built continued generating income for decades, supporting George Burns for more than 30 years after the act itself had ended. When Burns died in 1996 at the age of 100, his estate was valued at approximately $30 million, around $54 million today. Not the fortune of a reckless spender, but of a man who understood that laughter fades while ownership compounds. So here's the question. If a comedy act built on confusion and absurdity could produce such a disciplined financial system, what does that say about the difference between image and reality in Hollywood? Were Burns and Allen underestimated because their act looked unserious? And if owning content allowed their wealth to outlive both fame and performance, how many stars walked away from fortunes simply because they never owned the jokes they told? Danny Kaye looked like pure chaos on screen. His comedy was fast, physical, unpredictable tongue-twisting monologues, sudden dances, manic energy that felt almost out of control. To audiences, he was the opposite of a businessman. Too playful, too scattered, too busy being funny to be calculating. That perception worked perfectly for him. Behind the scenes, Kaye was methodical. He understood early that performance income was volatile. dependent on taste, timing, and health. So, while audiences focused on his frenetic screen persona, Kay quietly diversified. He invested in music publishing rights, foreign broadcasting deals, and international distribution, building streams of income that didn't require him to appear on stage at all. His most unexpected move came in 1977 when he joined the ownership group of the Seattle Mariners baseball team. At the time, sports franchises were not viewed as prestige assets for entertainers and certainly not as guaranteed financial wins. But Kay saw what others missed. Teams weren't trends, they were institutions. As league values rose over time, that single stake multiplied far beyond anything his films or performances could deliver late in life. What made Kay's strategy distinctive wasn't just diversification, but geography. While most stars invested close to home, Kay pursued international rights at a time when global media markets were still developing. As television expanded worldwide, those early positions quietly appreciated, turning foreign audiences into long-term revenue rather than one-time exposure. By the time of his death in 1987, Danny Kaye's fortune was estimated at over $10 million, roughly $25 million today, a sum built not from constant visibility but from positioning. To the public, he remained the manic entertainer. To his balance sheet, he was something else entirely, proof that control didn't have to look serious to be serious. So here's the question. If Danny Kaye was investing globally while everyone laughed locally, who was really thinking long-term? Was his frantic on-screen energy a distraction or a shield that kept attention away from quiet accumulation? And if diversification protected him from the limits of performance, how many stars tied their fortunes to applause alone? Howard Hughes entered Hollywood already different. He wasn't chasing fame to survive, he was using it to expand. Backed by profits from his family's oil drill bit patents, Hughes financed ambitious films like Hell's Angels, earning a reputation as a daring producer and occasional on-screen presence. To Hollywood, he looked like an eccentric mogul flirting with cinema. In reality, film was never the destination. It was leverage. Hughes understood something few in the industry could grasp. Entertainment was a gateway to capital, influence, and political access. While producing movies and dating Hollywood's most visible stars, he was quietly building companies in aviation and defense industries where scale, secrecy, and government contracts created wealth on a level movies never could. Using Hollywood credibility to open doors, Hughes expanded Hughes Aircraft into a defense powerhouse and acquired a major airline, turning show business connections into strategic advantage. What made Hughes truly untouchable wasn't talent or taste, it was diversification at a scale that dwarfed entertainment. Studios worried about profit participation and ownership of films. Hughes owned factories, patents, aircraft, and infrastructure tied directly to national defense. Hollywood money came and went, government contracts endured. By the time his public image collapsed into isolation and controversy, his economic footprint was already beyond the industry that once introduced him. When Hughes died in 1976, estimates placed his net worth between $1.5 and $2.5 billion, equivalent to $7.5 to $12.5 billion today. The shock wasn't the size of the fortune, it was how little of it came from Hollywood at all. Movies had been the spark, not the engine. So, here's the question. If Hollywood was merely a stepping stone, why do we still remember Hughes as a film figure first? Was the spectacle of celebrity enough to hide the reality of industrial power? And if entertainment could be used as a launchpad into vastly richer sectors, how many stars mistook the doorway for the destination? Rock Hudson was engineered to look effortless. Tall, handsome, dependable, the perfect leading man molded by the studio system. His image sold romance, stability, and certainty at a time when Hollywood demanded all three. But behind that carefully constructed facade was a man navigating far more than scripts and premieres. Hudson understood that survival in Hollywood required strategy, not just stardom. His financial turning point came when he negotiated one of the industry's earliest non-exclusive contracts with Universal Pictures. Instead of being locked into a single studio, Hudson gained the freedom to work elsewhere while maintaining his core relationship. This single adjustment effectively multiplied his earning potential, allowing him to capitalize on peak demand without sacrificing long-term leverage. While other stars remained trapped by restrictive agreements, Hudson quietly expanded his options. Yet his most durable wealth didn't come from contracts at all. Hudson invested heavily in Beverly Hills real estate, focusing not on showy mansions but on income-producing properties in areas poised for explosive growth. These were not purchases meant to impress the public. They were meant to last. As property values soared, Hudson's holdings appreciated steadily, insulating his wealth from the volatility of box office success. What made Hudson's strategy especially calculated was how it intersected with his private life. Living in an era hostile to his hidden identity, Hudson structured assets through corporations and property holdings that protected his finances regardless of personal exposure or industry backlash. His roles sold fantasy. His investments ensured independence. By the time of his death in 1985, Rock Hudson's estate stood at approximately $10 million, around $26 million today, a fortune built not on excess, but on foresight. He didn't out-earn Hollywood. He outplanned it. So here's the question. If a star forced to live behind a facade could still secure financial freedom, what excuse did those with fewer constraints have? Was Hudson's discipline born of necessity or clarity others never developed? And if real wealth came from assets no one saw, how many careers faded while silent portfolios endured? These 13 Golden Age stars expose a truth Hollywood rarely admits. The greatest fortunes of the era were not built under studio lights, nor paid out in weekly salaries. They were constructed quietly, deliberately, and often invisibly through land, ownership, contracts, and control. While audiences watched performances, these stars were building systems. While magazines celebrated glamour, they accumulated assets that outlived applause. What makes their stories so striking is not just the money, but the mindset. In an industry designed to control talent, they found ways to control outcomes. Some bought land when others bought mansions. Some demanded ownership when others demanded raises. Some treated Hollywood not as a destination, but as leverage a tool to access opportunities far beyond the screen. They didn't flaunt wealth. Many of them deliberately hid it. The studio system encouraged modest images, and the scars of the Great Depression taught caution over excess. But behind those carefully crafted personas were business decisions as sharp as any made on Wall Street. These weren't lucky performers. They were early architects of modern celebrity wealth decades before branding, social media, or venture capital became fashionable. And perhaps that is the most uncomfortable lesson of all. Fame was never the point. Fame was the currency they used to buy freedom. When careers slowed, when trends shifted, when the spotlight moved on, ownership stayed. Land kept producing. Rights kept paying. Assets kept growing long after the audience stopped clapping. So the next time we romanticize old Hollywood as a world of innocence and illusion, it's worth remembering this. Behind the smiles and scripts were minds calculating far beyond the next role. These stars didn't just survive Hollywood. They quietly outgrew it. And that may be the real legacy they left behind.